All right, welcome everyone at the next multi-network community sync. We have December 13 today, and today I have one topic. I managed to get team one-on-one and go over the design cap in context of all the complexity. So I have some good news around that one. Any other topics folks would like to bring up? If not, then uh, I think before we do that and get to that one, I would like to kind of set the next 2 weeks. We have holidays coming up. Folks, how folks are feeling to kind of cancel the next 2 weeks by the end of the year and basically set up next one for January.
I'll give a +1 to that.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Okay. What day is gonna be? It's gonna be January 3rd, or should we pass that one as well? Is January 3rd okay with everyone?
Yeah, let's try it.
All right, let's make that. Okay, let me maybe zoom this in a bit. All right, so getting to the main thing, as I mentioned, I had a one-on-one around all the concerns around complexity, and basically, first thing first is I think after presenting the general overview of our design, because we didn't go into much of the details, all the details that basically I had in my presentation, more or less kind of drawing up where and what we are touching on. I think I calmed down Tim's concerns around the complexity of this. He definitely was happy with us completely getting rid of the DRA uh, reliance that initially I was thinking, at least for the requirement for the selective node. So he's happy about that one. So I think the general sentiment right now is upward, that it's not so complex. After kind of giving some more detail compared to what he was aware before. That's one aspect. The other aspect, though, few things that team gave feedback on is default network, right? After discussion, kind of, I was pointing that out. I think that's something that I mentioned last week in our meeting, that I think the most complex things out of the kind of the phase one that we currently have is the default network, the definition of it and how it behaves, right? Um, and is there anything we can do to kind of change something around that one, right? I will call them out. I want to, let's discuss about the items that he gave feedback on later on, but for now I just want to call out the things. When we walk through the default network, basically what we saw is, and how we have it today, default network basically is part of the life cycle of the pod. That's what we want to do, because we want to ensure that the default network is present always in the cluster. So we put the reliance as well on the kubelet so that it ensures that the default network is there. That's one part. And then we always populate the default network inside the pod. And basically the question is, can we, because that's kind of put some constraints, right? Some blockages on how the whole thing works. And the question would be, can we maybe get rid of it, right? So that's the question. And I can go over that in detail in a second, but basically the kind of aspect of default network being part of the default pod's life cycle, even if nobody uses multi-networking, that's kind of a concern. Uh, then the other aspect was the upgrades. if we were to consider the way we have it, right, in terms of, okay, kubelet waits for the default network until it's ready. So all those aspects. So now how this whole thing is going to behave during an upgrade. And let's imagine we have 1000 node cluster and the process of upgrade is either sequential or some other aspect. And I'm here kind of familiar with what we're doing at Google, but every one of you have a platform of your own. And basically, let's walk through all those aspects of upgrades and ensure that this feature works, right? And how it's going to behave during the upgrades, right? Because that's basically important, right? So we definitely, I can go over what we do at Google and how that works, what are the kind of nooks and crannies around that one. But I would welcome any other platforms that you folks are working to give some feedback on those one, right? Let's walk through your platforms, your use cases of upgrade story and how this feature will work, right? Whether it will fit, what will break, what won't, what do we need to kind of address to ensure that we support all those upgrades. So upgrade of, and the main thing about like 1K cluster is just to kind of point out that it won't be instantaneous, right? It won't be like I will be able to upgrade all the nodes at the time, because that's not usually the case. You upgrade in sequence. So I upgrade like just 5 nodes at a time, like deployments, right? We can have our max search set for n, and basically we upgrade only a few batches at a time. So that's something that definitely we need to kind of address and ensure that we walk through the scenario and the current feature doesn't kind of break this. The last piece was autoscaler. And I think this might be more in context of probably Google. I'm not sure how much from your experiences you use autoscalers. I think that the platforms, I think things like clouds, they are definite users of that. At least at Google, we do. I'm not sure, Michael, Pete, Azure. I'm not sure whether you use
Yeah, but
autoscaler.
I don't know how the autoscaler works, to be honest. But by default, when you spin up a cluster, it will by default give you a node pool which has an autoscaler attached to it.
Right. So basically, how, because we are thinking of adding the small kind of check in the scheduler, how that would affect the autoscaler, because basically autoscaler is your scheduler simulator, right? That's what autoscaler does. That's to answer your question, Pete. That's what basically does. It simulates your scheduler, right? So basically, it's try to simulate. Okay, if I had this pod, let me simulate, try to run the scheduler code and see whether I will find a node that would fit to that pod. If I cannot, let me spin up a new pod in one of the node pools. Basically, that's the gist of the autoscaler. And that's why it's important, because the simulation of scheduler is very important here, and so that we don't break it further or at all, right? That's basically the gist of this whole thing, right? And I think this is what that my guess is this might be the main deal breaker for DRA as well, because it's hard for the simulation to work with something that, okay, I need to go to this controller and ask it about whether it has nodes for me for this specific device if I need it, right? So maybe that was something probably more complex for them to handle. So that was another aspect for team to kind of ensure that we do not over complex the autoscaler to kind of with our small change of the scheduler, and it still can function, and how would it function for with that capability, right? So I think those are the three main kind of feedback pointers in kind of general of what this has. Any questions to this? Okay, I hope that means no question. So the other thing that I think we kind of he was pushing towards is to bring this topic up in the next SIG network meeting, and basically have everyone's agreement on to yes, we want to commit towards the average level of complexity for Kubernetes that everyone wants it. And the key here would be to ensure we have all the stakeholders in the meeting, that everyone is heard, everyone is agreeing. So and here I think I assume Pete and Michael, I'm considering you guys as a representative for Azure team, and us will be from Google Cloud. I'm not sure we have in this meeting anyone from AWS. I assume we don't have, right, anyone representing AWS. So this is something that we have to have the major cloud players, and then Red Hat, Doug, you representative, and definitely Dan is going to be there from Red Hat. Oh yeah, Michael. So EKS, yeah, that will be good. And we need to kind of schedule the meeting. Let's before you reach out to them about the concrete date, but yeah, definitely you can start reaching out to kind of ping someone from EKS networking. So hear them out, whether they are concerned about it or they are just whatever and they are okay with it. Yes, that's fine. Or they just completely oppose, right? Let's because I don't think we have in this meeting anyone representing AWS at all. So so there's that aspect. So major stakeholders in Kubernetes, let's ensure that's kind of the gist of having that all those representatives in that SIG networking meeting commit around half an hour on this, discuss it out, and ensure that yes, we are agreeing on pushing that, pursuing this further on. Any comments to that? So I think that will give us great legitimacy on, and hopefully it will quench everyone's voices that we are too complex or we shouldn't do it. That will give us mandate to kind of pursue that in other SIGs and push forward with the kind of rest of the CAP to try to kind of merge it. So that's, I think this is a good news, at least from my point of view. We have a clear path towards getting this pushed forward. Any other questions? None.
Well, I guess regarding the timing of that meeting, Matre, I know you're gonna be out for a while.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit nervous about having that meeting without having your presence.
Yeah, and definitely that's everyone's kind of, even from our side, like it's that. So yeah, I wouldn't. That's why I kind of make sure, Michael. Um, let's hold on the date, and I would like to be there as well. So I think I should be back right around second half of January. So around that time, I would definitely let's kind of plan on that time of the month. And yes, I would like to be there and kind of make the case if anyone's having problems with this. Yeah, that sounds right, Doug. That's my impression as well.
Okay, cool. All right. Good. I am feeling a lot more relaxed. Nice.
All right. Any other questions, comments on this? So should we maybe try to walk through some of those items that we have and try to see whether we can do something about them? We have time, unless there are other topics. So on one more thing here, Nathan, we have you here. You mentioned you're gonna do your stuff on Calico. Can we consider you as a representative of Calico as a whole, or are you just using that small piece of it? What is the? Can you kind of describe the relationship? That's something that kind of, or should we pull in?
So we've been,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think, yeah, I think it would be worth adding someone from Tigera. Michael, you commented that on that.
All right.
We've
Yeah.
been interacting really closely with them, but
Mhm.
we are not. So we are not the same company.
Right.
We've contributed one of the data options, but I think I will be very comfortable speaking for them. As
Okay.
so
Right. So
we definitely have all use cases, but it's not completely Calico related.
got it. Got it. All right.
Yeah.
So that's good to know. So basically, because that includes like platforms and even the main CNIs as well in the picture, right? So that's what we need to ensure that everyone's on board on that one, right? So that's where so that's where I reminded, like Google is kind of behind whatever we will do in Cilium. So we have plans, if we were to push this, we have plans to kind of work with Cilium to get that one in. So yeah, and we need someone maybe from Calico. Are they okay with that one? So that, we don't have the bigger CNIs saying that no, we won't do it, or we would do it different way, right? Something like that, right? We must ensure that's not the case, right? Okay.
Yeah, agreed. And probably ask Casey if he wants to join. Happy to do that.
Yeah, Casey, I think, right? He would be. So someone was mentioning as well from my side, like, yeah, Casey would be the person, right? All right. So you know what? Let's first walk through this default pod network, right? I keep it default pod network. I mean, that basically I did want to walk through last week as well, but I think we ran out of time. So today, default pod network. Which one can I show best to kind of show that? Is that the cap or that's the picture? Maybe let me just show this. My picture, share this stuff. So the way default pod network we and view kind of vision and how it's currently in the cap is to few things, right? A, provide how someone called it nicely, symmetricity, right? So basically, if I provide the additional pod networks, I would equally provide the default one. And basically, if nobody cares about it, the default one is as well called out, right? So we have the consistency across the board on what the view of the pod is, right? Considering we have the new field in the pod, whether I connect to one or multiple, I have consistency, right? Where I either connect to just default or I connect to some other networks, right? So that the consistency, and that's kind of the main goal why we have it, right? Why we have the default pod network introduced, right? But to have that consistency, the cost for it is that we have to make sure it's always there because we are going to list it, right? That's one aspect. So we have some handling for it in two ways. The first handling is when I create a cluster, or if I were to upgrade a cluster to the new version, right? Because that's another aspect we have to look at, but just there, I have to create a default pod network in some ways, right? And basically the current design says you can either rely on the flags of KCM. So basically it will auto create the default network basically, if I think now the KCM, I think that was an aspect kind of before, because we had the IPAM. Now when I think about this, we have the IPAM fields in the pod network. Right now we don't have them. So default pod network doesn't have much of a configuration. There is, what is that? Is it enabled? The three fields that we have: enabled, vendor, and the last one is params reference. Those are only the three fields. And basically, when I created in automated way, the only thing I would set was the enabled true, right? And I would have a stub for it. So that's the most simpler way. If I don't need anything, I can do that, right? And then we would have the control that would set it true, to condition to ready, sorry, to ready to true. So that is the current kind of plan around the default network creation. And we need to have it created because any pod started with the new model, right, with the new APIs now, and any pod restarted would have that auto-populated to the pod, right? So basically I will see, oh, I have a pod, you want to create it. I would assume maybe scheduler or somewhere in API, we would see, oh, you don't specify any pod networks. Let me add that field just to you to pod network, specify the default one, right? But then since we have the whole mechanism in scheduler stating, oh, if the pod doesn't exist or is not ready, I will say that the pod has to stop in track, right? Don't schedule it. And this is the part where this whole thing becomes part of pod lifecycle, right? Because we want to add this small tidbit that don't schedule it if it's not ready, right? Or it doesn't even exist, right? So this is where the whole thing gets complex, because we want to list it, but then we want to have to kind of react based on that, right? And then to kind of prevent kubelets, so specific node, from accepting new nodes or new pods, we said that if the default pod network doesn't exist, don't be not ready. Similar like CNI, right? CNI, when you don't have the CNI config, kubelet would say, I'm not ready. So this is the same thing. We want to kind of gate the nodes from being schedulable until the default network is created. And this is for the case where, okay, I want to create the default network myself. I know I will use params reference. I need to create that. I need to do more configuration around this before the default pod network is created, because it has to be more than just the simple stub. So for that reason, so we need to gate on when I can create it. So I need to kind of block the whole thing around it so that the new kubelets don't kind of right away start scheduling pods on things where the default pod network doesn't exist. Though now what I think about this, if we have the scheduler, maybe the kubelet is not necessary, right? If you have a scheduler that will prevent from doing that, having the readiness on the pod, maybe this kubelet stuff is redundant. Now what I think about this, because we already have a scheduler looking at the readiness of the pod, so, and the pod has to be there and present. Check reference pod networks presence and ready condition. If that's the case, your new pod would never get scheduled. So I assume this is redundant, right? Any comments? Or do we need, is there a case where we would need a kubelet level?
I just had a thought. I'm trying to think about how to make this easier for users, and
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's possible to do this. Is it possible that we could have a flag somewhere in the configuration that says this Kubernetes cluster just doesn't use pod network, and therefore we don't need a default pod network resource, and we can follow through from that. And then for most users who don't need any multi-network stuff, they can avoid all this. Is that a viable option?
I wonder.
can't
Yeah,
remember
that's a fair
that.
point. Whether currently we are planning to have a feature flag, right? Feature flags are temporary. Basically, those are feature flagged to you know, a alpha preview feature, right, to enable those. I don't think those then are translated to a permanent. I want to enable this additional feature. But when you say this, I think that's fair, and that might be the solutions for this. Because now when I think about it, I think there is this kind of feature of topology manager, right? And that's a feature, right, where the default scheduling capability of the kubelet and basically, I think this is feature for kubelet is being done by flag, right? It's disabled by default. Basically, the CPU and full CPU assignment, and when we want to do it for the telco side of the cluster, to have a cluster for telcos, we need that topology manager, right, to be set to specific values. So I think you're right. Maybe this is something that we can just create a permanent flag stating this cluster will not be multi-networking. And since this is such a
It just feels like maybe that this makes things a bit better for people, and it might also make the upgrade suddenly look a lot easier, because we might be able to just say, look, if you've got a cluster that doesn't support pod network at all, you can't upgrade it to one that does, sorry, but all the existing clusters will continue to work. It's just they can't use the new pod network features. So maybe that makes the upgrade model easier too. I've got a feeling it's going to make things more complicated in other places, but
I think that last piece, if I cannot enable this feature, even during upgrade, how do I convert my existing clusters? That's basically makes this a zero level of adoption, Pete. At least from when I think about like GKE side, barely anyone would be able to adopt this, right? Because if I cannot convert my existing cluster to this, how?
Yeah.
Why? That I do like the feature flag, but it has to be enableable during at least an upgrade. I'm not saying in place for existing cluster. Maybe that's too much. I agree with you, but during upgrade, I think that part, at least that part, we have to define.
Yeah, I have in mind the kind of telco use cases where you always know before you create a cluster, this is going to do some crazy networking stuff. And yeah, you're right. In GKE, something like that, where you want to add network separation later on, you might very well decide I'm going to change how my application works and add network separation. I don't want to recreate all my clusters. So yeah, I think you're right. We can't have it. We can't take out the upgrade.
The upgrade option has to be there. But I think what you're saying is right. I don't think anyone has experience with that. I wonder whether I think if I will try to reach to Antonio. He probably will have most experience of how would that work if that is possible. Because you're right. We always thinking assuming, yeah, let's enable this everywhere for everyone. Maybe we don't have to, right? And then basically the 90%, or today, at least today, 90% of clusters just won't enable this, right? And then we don't affect them. Yeah, I think that will be a good proposal. Let me just note that. Yeah. I need to think about the kubelet though part, but because I think when this was added, that was mostly for the case where, trying to remind myself, I think this was for the case where we would want to support a change for the default network, right? Because that was another aspect from Tim. Now I reminded myself. With the default network, if I have everything bound to default network, if I don't specify it's on default, right? Let's say service, right? What will happen if I change the default network, right? In some ways, does it still apply? Does the service that was created for the default network still apply, or it doesn't, right? Or yeah, basically that aspect, right? If I can replace the name in some way, what will that mean? Is that possible, right? I think in our case, and this was like in a case where how the default network is defined, whether it's by name, so basically it's a concrete hard-coded Symlike namespace, a name that it's default, or is it a pod network named foo with the annotation, right? And then that means this now foo is now the default, right? I think the annotation thing is easy to, then you can easily change what's your default, but there is a consequence of what I said before, right? If I have a service created on default and now the default changed to something else because default is inferred, is basically the name that we kind of plugged into the objects, what happens then, right? So that was another, I think that's some idea that Tim brought up, is what if we were to, instead of having a named default object, what if we had it annotated? Maybe that might not be the worst case, because if we annotate, then I think Dan was bringing up that what if I need to upgrade and I need to change something about the default network, right? How do we do that? And basically the case was that we have to have a means to support such upgrade, right? In maybe during the full upgrade process, but there needs to means to change the default network at some point in the time, right? So we should not block that path. And for that reason, I think that's where the whole kubelet change was in, so that we could support something like this migration, right? Because we would then maybe introduce some field inside the node, being able to override the default for that particular node. And that will then trigger this check of, okay, now I don't check the default, I check the override if it's there, and then I can do migration because I have my path towards changing the default on a particular node from one to the other, right? If it's a named object, right? What if it's not named object? What would happen if we were to change the default by just annotation? So it might be tricky in the case that he pointed out, Tim, that okay, this was before default, now it's not, and now we are swapping that things around under the hood. But I think what would that mean is all the objects that refer to pod network would have to always populate a field in it for that pod network. So basically, if as I mentioned in my example, if currently my default network is foo, all my pods, when they are just created with no network, will have foo word, not default, but foo in it, in the spec populated, right? Because currently foo is the one that is default. So I'm populating foo. So in the future, if you change to bar, those pods still are valid, right? They were initially pointing out to foo, right? But the problem about functionality here right now, we would have to ensure that foo and bar, that's our kind of ultimate goal, but that might be tricky, right? Where now foo and bar are in parity, right? All those two networks properly function as two things. But maybe this will as well simplify the migration if we want to kind of replace the default network, right? Thoughts on this? The other thing here would be we cannot infer if the object doesn't have a pod network even spec, right? We cannot infer that it belongs to default, right? That's the tricky part around this, right? Because having a hard-coded name of the object gives us the will that, okay, if I don't specify anything, you belongs to the default pod network, right? If we go with the annotation path for the object, everything that has to belong to a specific network has to call it out, right? So we would have to change service, for example, to add the field for pod network, right? Which I don't think we would want to do. So maybe for that reason, that might not be the best approach. Thoughts on this, or did I lost you on something here? Any questions around that one?
I'm not. I've got a little bit lost. I'm trying to figure out what
Mhm.
the desired behavior around this default pod network actually is, what we'd actually want to happen when it changes.
Right. Well,
I'm
that's
very
fair
nervous
point.
about changing it just because if you change the default pod network,
Mhm.
and the bit where I kind of went off thinking about this and couldn't, I kind of stuck myself in a corner was, if you change the pod network, you change a pod network resource, or if you create a different default pod network, the pods that are using it
Yeah.
are affected by that. Previously we said that pod networks couldn't change, that they were going to be immutable effectively, because changing the
Yeah.
pod network wouldn't change the pods, and therefore that would be problematic. It feels like changing the default pod network might be problematic as well in that way.
So we called out that it is immutable, but during some more specialized process, like let's say upgrade, I should be able to do something, right? I should be able to change it, but this will be the one case where I could do it when I do this maintenance mode of sorts, right? And in this special case, I should have a path towards updating it, right? Let's say at my upgrade in the maintenance mode, I will reshuffle all the pods. So all the pods will get recreated, right? So in that case, you know, everything's gonna be recreated with the new stuff. So that's good, right? And that works. But then how do I open that path for it, right? You see that use case,
Yeah.
Pete?
I mean, there has to be during the middle of this process when pods are being deleted and recreated, there has to be a point where there are two networks, one of which is the
Yeah.
old default and one of
Yeah.
which is the new default, and they have to have different names because they're
Yeah.
different objects, and
Yeah.
that probably means the pods have to somehow point to a different one, and you can make them explicitly change, but maybe we just have somewhere we have some field that says, or something in a pod network says this one is the default, rather than having a hard-coded name.
Right.
So that we can change which one. So we create a new pod network, we validate it's okay, and then we switch over which one's the default. And then from then on, every pod that gets restarted that just looks for the default will just end up with that one.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
right
This is
kind of
a
flow,
free.
but it feels
This is definitely exactly what you just said, because I have a let's say I have a default and new default pod networks, right? So first I need to switch all the pods towards new default, and then I'm gonna have to again switch them to the new. So so when I switch everything to new default, my default name is free. I can delete that, right? And now I can create replace that default with the same view, the same spec as the new default, but with the name default, right? You see? And that can allow me to kind of have because you need the third cap usually. That's how, like in back in the days when you want to kind of shuffle things around, you need always the third place onto where you put temporarily where you would put things, right? So basically the new default name is that temporary thing. You move everything to that. No pods DAO uses default. And then you delete the default network and you recreate it with the spec same as your new default object, right? So now you have default, which is in the new view.
so. I don't know quite whether what I want to suggest will make sense, but I've got my default network. I want to call that default 1 because I'm going to have several defaults, and I decide I want it to be something different. So I create default 2. I want to change some config so that what I want to say is if I create a pod with no network specified, it uses default 1 until a cutover point where it starts using default 2. At the point where it starts using default 2, I want to get rid of default 1, and I don't need to rename anything if I can somehow specify this is the name of the default network somewhere.
Currently, yeah, gotcha.
So that would be, so that's kind of the angle I'm going down. I don't quite know how you would do that though, because you need something that says what the name of the default network is somewhere in your cluster. and we don't really
Yeah,
have anywhere to
maybe
put that.
that can be a variable that you pass to your API server. Probably all the all the core components on Kubernetes. You would say, okay, now the default name. So some argument. So it will be a parameter to those core components where you can overwrite your default name. Now let's say, and now okay, I restarted. I am upgrading, and now with the upgraded version, I added this new argument to all my controllers, stating the new default is the new name for default is default1, something like that.
Yeah, and
I think that's what you mean, right?
Yeah, I guess that's right. And then you'd have, it does tie changing the default network to some kind of major upgrade or change of API flags. But
Yeah.
actually, that's probably okay because it's not something you do every 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that could be the path towards that. So, and we are looking at it at very extreme level. Keep in mind, when you think about our current view of, and let me show that, our current view of the, this is the old one, but doesn't matter. Let me see the pod network. The way the pod network is now, it has only 3 fields. I don't think either of the fields will get changed. I doubt any cluster will change a provider from A to B. So I think this whole elaborate approach is very complex. The only thing that you would change is this guy, the parameters. And basically this will still point to a specific parameter, and how you handle that CRD, it's up to you. And basically then if you control it, you can swap it out, right? From one configuration, from parameters A to something else. There is that aspect. So since this guy doesn't barely have any configuration, we just set it to false. Your CNI implementation just has to support, or it's not so crucial changing wise that you have to kind of restart all the pods. So maybe you can, right? But then basically what you would do is you would delete the parameters that you have today. That will make that that pod network object not ready, which is fine, right? Because you fully understand it is an upgrade process or some maintenance process. And then you create the new version of the object. This becomes back true, and then you just need to reshuffle all your pods to that, so that they all get restarted, so they all apply the new configuration.
Yeah, I quite like this, the idea that the whole idea of deleting and recreating the default network, maybe we just don't have to support that.
Exactly.
And maybe that's such a niche case that, well, we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. With this one, because I think that was before a problem where we had the IPAM story in it, all the additional configuration. This was a problem because you would want to now change from single stack to dual stack, right? Okay, I need to do that. So how do I deal with that, right? So now I need to change the object, right? But since we don't have any of those fields in here, I think provider is not something that you would want to change, or maybe you don't set it, maybe at that point, right? If you don't mind. It's also optional anyway. And then the only thing you would want to change is the parameters, and you can swap out the name of the parameter, right? You can delete it because it's on you. Your webhooks, depending on your implementation, you might have webhooks to put some finalized on the object, but you can override it during the maintenance mode and have it all kind of set up. But otherwise, should be good, right? So in that manner, I think you're simplified. So having said all this, but I do like the idea what you said, like with the argument override. That's something that definitely we probably can mention as well. But getting back to my presentation, share this. What I'm thinking now, since we have the scheduler complexity and check for presence, I am leaning towards getting rid of the kubelet check. I think that's something that we don't need. That's my impression, that we don't need that complexity on kubelet. It doesn't have to know whether the pod network existed or not, because if you enable multi-pod network, we have the flag. you enable the cluster, you are aware that you have to create the default network. All it will be automatically created for you. And then the scheduler will do all the checks, right? Whether the object exists or and whether it's ready or not. So the kubelet doesn't matter. So we can keep kubelet as is. And then what will change is just the default, the endpoint slice scheduler, and basically the checks for the new stuff. Yeah, that will be much simpler then. Even then, and then for the rest of the for the lifecycle address and we would do something like what you said, Pete, that we would provide a permanent feature flag, right? Saying that if you want to enable multi-network, pass this flag to all the controllers, and that flag is just permanent. It's not just for alpha feature, it's just for the permanent, even GA. You have to just enable it. Any comments to that? I think the I kind of summarizing is getting rid of the kubelet modification and changing the flag to be permanent, right? Anything else on this? I think, yeah.
I feel like I'm still catching up on this one, honestly, but
No, that's good. We can walk through it again and then ask your question.
All right, so if we don't modify the kubelet to handle ready, not ready, then will it ever change to ready from OC get pods or get nodes? Because or sorry, kubectl get nodes. Sorry, my downstream
Yeah, sure.
shirt is showing. The because won't that be confusing to users if you do kubectl get nodes ready or not ready? Not ready because you never put a CNI configuration there, right? Because today it relies on there being the presence of that CNI configuration. So can we get away from that? Because
if I'm not mistaken, and we had Michael's not here. Antonio, I think I heard last week or 2 weeks ago, there was a change merged into this. I think this was, CRI change or one of those, where that piece that you just described, check of the config, is not the only thing that is being checked. There apparently in CNI API, and correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, because you probably should know, there is a status that the CNI can return to the CRI. And basically that status now should be accepted as well. So basically it shouldn't be just by checking the path, but as well getting the status from or getting the status from the CNI. So CNI can now return stating, I'm not ready. And basically that will make the CRI return that's not ready and node goes down. But I'm just talking slightly about slightly different things. Here, if assuming that that's not there, yes, it will still just rely on that the CNI path is there. But I would assume that we don't modify, by the way, Doug, this part, right? See, if I think at least when I look at Google GKE clusters, we have kubelet, containerd, CNI, right? That's the kind of the chain of the things that's calling it, and that we don't modify that, right? You see that, right? And that's why the existing check for the config is still there, and it has to be there. You see that part?
Okay. I mean, I'm okay with it overall because I will probably have CNI configurations there for some time to come. But yeah, I guess, yeah, still wrapping my head around it a little bit, but yeah, I'm getting there. The
Because
intention of removing this change, I understand too, so yeah.
so this one would keep in mind this was only this change, this thing was only for the default pod network. It would not check it was the scheduler's job to check all the other networks. This was only for the default. So basically it was not about to change like how the whole thing changes for the other stuff, right? This was only explicitly for default network so that it's always there before I even start scheduling things. That was the goal. So it wouldn't even affect what you have today, right? To what you are describing about the CNI config, it wouldn't change that aspect. It will still be had to be there for the other networks. Or let's say if we were to use Multus, you would have to have and ensure that that guy is still there. That kind of points out to Multus. If you don't change, if we were to just reuse Multus as it is today, right? With the minimal changes. I'm not talking like bigger
Sure, yeah,
bigger
but
changes, just
yeah,
keeping it
that's
doing minimal set of changes, right? It's still we rely on the CNI on container deep calling it, and then Multus inside having more better logic on kind of understanding the whole thing, but that will be the only kind of change inside Multus. The rest, how it's called, still would be the same.
okay. Yeah, I'm okay with that for the moment, for sure. So thank you. So okay, I guess another question is, all right, so we're handling it from the scheduler side, which we've been talking about, but now I'm thinking about it a little bit differently.
Mhm.
What is it gonna look like to a user um when their referenced pod networks are not in a ready condition and their pods aren't coming up? Because this is something that happens with
Yeah.
me and Multis today, is we have what
Yeah,
we call readiness indicator file. It tells you that your whatever default network provider is ready.
Right.
And even as much as we have like extremely direct error messaging in Multis that says stuff like, have you checked that your default network provider is ready, because your default network provider never created this file. And it still confuses people. So I'm wondering what that's gonna look like. Like, will it be like a Kubernetes event?
So what's gonna happen is I would imagine on the pod, right? Right now, if something fails when the pod, you will have an event, yes. The pod will never get scheduled, so it will not yet be assigned to any of the nodes. So your
Okay.
CNI is not engaged at any point yet. That's one
Right.
aspect, right?
Yep.
So basically what happens is being stuck. I'm not sure you saw, oh, you probably saw this. The example of this similar thing is when there is no resource, right? Let's say I want to schedule a pod with an SRV VF, but the VF, there is no such VF or something, right? The pod will get stuck in this scheduler kind of state. This is the same. I'm trying to get to that same kind of thing where when I list all the pods, the pod will have the node, and you do dash o wide, the node column will be empty for that pod because there is no.
Because it will never. It's never been scheduled,
It
right?
never gets scheduled, and there will be an
Yeah.
event saying, like if you do this with the SRV resource, it says nodes found 3 out of 3 nodes. There is this long error message stating there's 3 out of 3 nodes, no nodes available resource something. There's the message is event is wrong.
Got it. I follow exactly.
So
I'm totally
basically, this
familiar.
will be the same event stating your pod lists pod foo is not ready. That's it.
Got it. All right, cool.
And very straightforward, right? Or
Because I
your
think
pod,
that that's, from a user perspective, even more important than the
yeah.
node
And
readiness from the
you go
user.
to the network pod network foo, and you see why my network is not ready, or maybe it will be something else, because I will definitely be able to do this. you referencing pod foo. Pod foo doesn't exist. That's even better, right? So basically the two errors, doesn't exist or it's not ready. If it's not ready, then I go, okay, show me the pod, describe me the pod foo, what's the deal? And I see that it's not ready because let's say it's disabled. The network is disabled. So you will see at the conditions and you say, oh, it's administratively disabled. Okay, so okay, what's the deal with that? You look at some description of why this was disabled or something. That's one aspect. The other aspect could be, oh, the params ready is not ready. So then, because you're referencing some additional, let's say, network attachment definition, and your controller said for some reason that it didn't set the params ready condition. And this is where you come in. You don't need a file anymore because you can do it now through this, right? That's another thing that we are adding, right? Because now you don't need to have a file somewhere that or someone reads and says whether you're ready or not. You just call it through the API and say, and you control it through the API because you will or will not set the params ready condition, right? This is how you would control it because, okay, I need to set up my VLANs. Until then, you're not ready, right? I will deem this network from my implementation side not ready. That's how you indirectly control that readiness as well for the network.
Totally following. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for walking me through that. I appreciate it much.
Yeah. So this is where I think, yeah, that will be the kind of path of how you would debug that, right? See on the pod, describe the pod. Pod says pod network doesn't exist or it's not ready, and then I describe the pod network. See what's the deal, why it's not ready, right? Yeah, basically that's how I would envision this. We are at the time. Any other questions?
Nope. Happy holidays to everyone, and yeah, nice to see you all. Catch you in the new year.
Yeah, definitely. Next time, I won't be next time. That will be my. I keep warning that I won't be, but probably next time I won't be. Definitely the next time in January, the first meeting in January. What I would like you to folks kind of continue on discussion on the upgrade, right? How would that work? Probably I won't be there, but then I can continue. We can continue discussion in the next follow-up meetings on your use cases. How would the upgrade look like, right? And with the case where we enable the flag, right? Assuming the flag is now permanent and we are enabling the flag in the cluster, right? How this will behave, how with all the current moving pieces, how would that be created, right? And now let's assume it's not. This is not the case where from top we know that it's telco, where we know what's gonna be there. But even for telco, right? You might have some existing deployments, right? Even in telco, and now you're upgrading to this model, right? Because now you need to migrate to the new state, right? How would you do that? Let's all of you for your respective platforms think about that, so that we can kind of brainstorm on every use case and see whether that works. Okay. Yep. And thanks everyone. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. See you in January.
All right. Catch you all soon. All right. Thanks everybody.
Yep.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.